Good afternoon, everyone. Today, my colleagues Darshini, Chandralekha, and I, Devang, research scholars of IIT Madras, will be presenting on the topic transitioning from fast to slow fashion. Our presentation is divided into three sections. I will begin with the introduction, outlining the background, the problem, and the theoretical basis of our study. My colleagues will explain the methodology, results, and finally the discussion and conclusion. Fashion has always been just more than clothing. It reflects self expression, identity, culture, and even social status. However, over the past 2 decades, the industry has been dominated by fast fashion. That is, rapid production of inexpensive, trendy garments designed to move quickly from runway to retail stores. At first glance, fast fashion seems like a success story, making clothing more affordable. Fast fashion is built on an overproduction and overconsumption with millions of tons of textile waste, and this is projected to rise by 60% by 2030, crossing 150 million tons. The environmental impact is staggering due to water intensive production. Beyond environmental harm, the human cost is also significant, with unsafe working conditions, sweatshop labor, and poor wages in many developing countries. In response, slow fashion has emerged as a counter movement. Slow fashion promotes quality, durability, and conscious consumption, encouraging customers to buy fewer but better made items that are ethically sourced and environmentally sustainable. One might expect that increasing environmental awareness would naturally drive consumers towards slow fashion. Yet, the reality reveals a puzzling disconnect, as 30% of consumers claim they intend to purchase sustainable products, only about 3% actually do. This mismatch, known as attitude behavior gap, presents a major challenge for researchers, policymakers, and business alike. Why does this gap exist? Prior studies suggest that much of consumer behavior has been explained through extrinsic motivators such as pricing strategies, government policies, financial rewards, or social pressures. While while these explanations are useful, they do not fully capture the internal psychological side of decision making. This brings to us the research gap of our study aimed to address that we focused the role of intrinsic motivators, particularly autonomy and relatedness. Autonomy refers to the sense of freedom and personal control that consumers feel while making choices. If consumers feel they independently choose sustainable fashion, they are more likely to commit on it. Relatedness refers to the feeling of connection with others. Since fashion is often social, com- uh, what people wear communicates belonging and identity, which could influence sustainable consumption. Alongside these, we also considered green efficacy, which refers to the consumer's confidence in their ability to make eco-friendly decisions, such as buying sustainable clothes or recycling garments. Even when consumers want to act sustainably, they might they may doubt whether these choices made are good or not. The first the first part of our theory is the self-determination theory, which explains motivation through three psychological needs, that is, autonomy, competence, and relatedness. In this study, we are particularly emphasizing upon autonomy and relatedness. The second is the self-efficacy theory, which states that people are more likely to act when they believe they achieve desired outcomes. By combining these frameworks, our study sought to test how autonomy, relatedness, and green efficacy individually and collectively influence sustainable consumption. In summary, the background is clear that fast fashion is environmentally and socially unsustainable, while slow fashion offers a path forward. Yet the attitude behavior gap prevents many consumers from making this shift. By focusing on autonomy, relatedness, and green efficacy, our study aims to shed light on psychological mechanisms behind sustainable consumption. With this foundation, I will now hand over to Darshini, who will walk you through the methodology used to test these ideas and the results we obtained. Over to you, Darshini. Thank you.
Thank you, Deva. So, our research explored how autonomy, relatedness, and green self efficacy influences sustainable consumption behavior in the fashion industry. We gathered 172 responses and tested our model using structural equation modeling. If we frame our methodology and results through 7 pillars of statistical wisdom, we can see how statistical principles guided both the supported and unsupported hypothesis. So the first is aggregation. We began by aggregating individual survey responses into constructs, that is autonomy, relatedness, self-efficacy, and sustainable consumption behavior. Instead of noisy individual options, this aggregation gave us stable patterns such as consumers preferring durable clothing or recycled materials. The second is information. With 172 responses, we gained meaningful insights, but the precision of the estimates shrinks at the rate of 1 by root of n, not linearly. This means that while we could confidently detect the strong effect of autonomy, smaller effects like relatedness and self-efficacy may have appeared insignificant because the information content was limited relative to their weaker impact. The third is likelihood. SEM relies on maximum likelihood estimation. The strong path from autonomy to SEB significantly improved the likelihood of explaining our data. By contrast, relatedness and self efficacy did not add much to the likelihood, which is why their hypotheses were not supported. Next slide, please. Huh. The fourth one is intercomparison. Statistic often relies on comparing groups internally. The t-test is a classic example where differences in means are judged relative to internal variation. In our study, the intercomparison was between the predictors autonomy versus relatedness and self-efficacy. Just as the t-test reveals whether a difference is significant, our model showed autonomy, the first one, that is the critical region, which is 5.810, had a much stronger and significant effect, while the others did not stand out against the background variation. Then we did regression, the fifth pillar of statistical wisdom. Regression quantified the strength of these relationships. Next slide. Autonomy had a larger significant effect, which is beta is equal to 0.793, p-value less than 0.05, but relatedness and self-efficacy were weak. Altogether, the predictors explain 37% of variance in the behavior. This shows regression power in separating strong from weak drivers. The sixth statistical pillar is design. The credibility of these results depend on careful survey design, validated scales, Likert measures, and check for method bias. Still, some SEB items showed low factor loading, which may have weakened the measurement of behavior and partly explains why relatedness and self-efficacy paths were not significant. The final thing is residuals. Finally, we checked for chi-square, which is essentially the sum of squared residuals. Our chi-square divided by degrees of freedom ratio was 2.001, comfortably below the cutoff of 5, showing that the unexplained difference between observed and expected values were acceptably small. This confirmed that our model fit the data well, even if some hypotheses were not supported. So thus the 7 pillars doesn't just explain our methods, they clarify why autonomy mattered the most and why other hypotheses were not supported. Over to you, Chandralekha.
Thank you, Darshini. Now, let's pause and reflect on what our findings mean for both research and practice. Our study set out to examine how autonomy, relatedness, and green self efficacy shape sustainable consumption behavior in the context of fashion. The results gave us both expected and surprising insights. First, autonomy clearly emerged as a significant driver. In simple terms, when customers feel free and empowered to make their own fashion choices, rather than being swayed by peer pressure, trends, or marketing, they are more likely to engage in sustainable consumption. For businesses and policymakers, this finding is instructive. It suggests that strategies should not rely only on discounts or awareness campaigns, but instead on empowering individuals to feel ownership of their sustainable decisions. By contrast, relatedness and green self efficacy did not show significant effects. This was somewhat unexpected. Since fashion is widely seen as a social practice and confidence often predicts action, it was really unexpected. However, the lack of significance does not imply that these constructs are irrelevant. Rather, their influence may be context specific. Consider relatedness. In some societies, sustainable behavior may indeed stem from group belonging, such as communities that value eco friendly practices. But in the Indian fashion market, the focus of our study, individual freedom and self expression may matter more than collective identity. Globalization and Western style individualism could explain why autonomy dominates while relatedness is weaker. A similar story applies to green self efficacy. Confidence in making eco friendly choices did not translate into behavior in our sample. Likely, confidence alone is insufficient. Consumers may believe they can act sustainably, but barriers such as high prices, limited availability, or doubts about brand claims restrict actual practices. Thus, self efficacy may require enabling conditions like accessible products, credible certifications before it drives behavior. These findings highlight and support the attitude behavior gap. Having the right attitudes or confidence does not guarantee sustainable action. Instead, psychological needs, cultural norms, and structural barriers interact in complex ways. Naturally, our study has limitations. First, our sample was modest, 172 participants via online survey, so results are not easily generalized. Second, our cross-sectional design captures correlations but not causality. Longitudinal studies could better show how motivations and behaviors evolve. Third, we focused only on three constructs, leaving out factors such as environmental knowledge, green trust, and consumer effectiveness, all of which future research should include. Fourth, our results are context specific to Indian fashion sector, so generalization across cultures or industries must be cautious. Despite these limitations, our study contributes meaningfully. Theoretically, it confirms the central role of intrinsic motivation, particularly autonomy, in sustainable fashion choices. It also shows the need for more nuanced investigation of relatedness and self efficacy, as their effects may vary across cultural and market conditions. Practically, it advises companies and policymakers to design empowerment focused strategies such as transparent supply chains, customizable eco products, and campaigns that stress freedom and individuality over guilt. To conclude, our study adds to the growing body of research on sustainable consumption by highlighting the evolving roles of autonomy, relatedness, and green self efficacy. We found that autonomy is a significant driver, confirming that empowering individuals matters. At the same time, the lack of significance for relatedness and self efficacy remind us that motivations are complex and context specific. We would like to end the presentation with this. Thank you.